Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Wednesday in the Word here at the Trinity Gardens Church of Christ. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you guys, just sharing a little bit knowledge on mental health and wellness. My name is Michelle Reescano. I'm a mental health professional speaker, and trainer and consultant. Tonight, I'm here to share with you a little bit about resources, how we can seek help when we're struggling with mental illness or mental health challenges. And a lot of times people will ask me, what is this therapy stuff all about? What is it all about? And I'm alarmed sometimes at how much people don't really know. In the past several years, mental health has started to be more widely accepted in spiritual organizations, in schools, in workplaces. And so we're reducing the amount of shame that's surrounding getting help. So many people over the years have suffered in silence. And so tonight, I want to share a little bit with you about how you can seek help if you're struggling with mental health and illness. Now, first things first, let's talk about counseling, mental health counseling. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a private practice where I provide mental health professional services to those who are struggling to just deal with daily life demands. We may be talking about daily stress, work-life balance. It could be family conflict, domestic violence, marital conflict, bullying at school. It could be anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress from a traumatic event that happened all of a sudden that was unexpected. It could be bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. There's so many different types of mental health illness that I'm unable to share them all with you tonight. But I am able to share with you where you can go to get help. It's very important that if you're struggling with a mental health illness that is debilitating, that's causing you not to be able to get up out of bed, that's causing you to have suicidal ideation, thoughts about death, about not wanting to be here anymore, about harming yourself. Anxiety that's causing you physical pain in your body where you can't get up, you can't think with clarity, you're having crying spells, all of those things. Where do we go to get help at? Mental health professionals. There are different types of mental health professionals. There's licensed professional counselors. There's licensed clinical social workers, licensed mental health professionals who are psychologists or psychiatrists. Tonight, I'm going to help you understand the difference between some of these. Okay? So a licensed professional counselor is someone who has gone to college or a graduate school of college, and they have obtained a master's degree in mental health and counseling. They are also required to have another 3,000 hours training under a licensed professional counselor, and then take a very significant and challenging test to prove that they have knowledge, skills, and abilities to support those who are struggling with mental health. A licensed professional counselor is able to provide diagnoses such as anxiety, depressed mood, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, unresolved grief, complicated grief. And so that is someone that we really want to seek out if you're struggling with serious mental health challenges that is causing you to be in this space where you're not able to function. Similarly, a licensed clinical social worker, which is where I hold my degree at, must obtain a master's degree in social work After obtaining the master's degree in social work, I was required to take a licensing exam, a state license exam that indicates my skills, abilities, and knowledge to be able to support those who are struggling with mental health challenges. Now, the difference between a licensed professional counselor, which we refer to as an LPC, and a licensed clinical social worker is that the licensed clinical social worker is able to begin practicing therapy once they've attained that license as a master's level social worker after 6 years of continued education, as long as they're working within an agency. So for many years, I worked with Harris County Juvenile Probation Department as a therapist. I did family therapy, groups, parenting groups, and work with children that were at risk, struggling with mental health diagnosis, gang activity, and some that were also sex offenders. However, I was only able to work under a governing agency with a licensed master social work. After obtaining the licensed master of social work, taking that state exam and passing that exam, then I was required to study for another 3,000 hours under a licensed clinical social worker who has been by the state deemed knowledgeable and skilled enough to private practice, to work in private practice, which means in private practice, there is no one supervising you. You are now considered an expert in the field of mental health. You are able to diagnose, you are able to provide therapy, groups, training, and education in the mental health field. And so after those 3,000 hours working with another professional, then I was required to take another licensing exam. That was a very challenging exam that many people struggle to pass. But I say to those who haven't passed yet, keep going. I don't care how many times you have to take it, over and over again. Some of us are just not good test takers. But I was required to take that final exam after another 3,000 hours, which equates to 8 years of education to become a licensed clinical social worker. I went on to obtain a certification and license to supervise other clinicians who want to become clinical social workers so that they too can open private practices. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So what can a licensed professional counselor, a licensed clinical social worker do? They can open up a private practice. This is where you would go in and you would request counseling. Counseling, what does that look like? Typically, we're doing 1-hour sessions. You would have an initial session where you would come in and meet with myself or a licensed professional counselor, and you would do an assessment. So there's a couple of assessments that we might do. One would be a biopsychosocial, right? Remember, I talked earlier about mental health is biological, psychological, and social factors. It's our biological, psychological, and social well-being. And so we would do an assessment to determine if there is any disruption in those areas in your life. Depending on what we find there, we may also do some additional risk assessments, such as a GAD-7, which is a generalized anxiety disorder scale. That scale helps us to measure any signs and symptoms of anxiety that you might be experiencing. Now, it doesn't mean that you have a diagnosis of anxiety. What it means is that you may have signs and symptoms of anxiety, and if we don't begin to work on that proactively and strategically, you could end up with a diagnosis of anxiety based simply on environmental factors. That could be high stress jobs, high stress in our homes, domestic violence, abuse. And so being in those environments, studies have shown that it can change the chemical makeup in our brains. Another assessment that we might do is called a PHQ-9. That is a standard depression scale where we would highlight signs and symptoms of a depressed mood on a scaling system. That also will help us to understand which signs and symptoms you might be experiencing that may be leading you towards a diagnosis of depressed mood, or you may already be there. But we don't simply do those assessments and say you are anxious or you're depressed. We do the assessments, and this is the areas that we begin to target and monitor. For one reason is to prevent you from having more signs and symptoms that could dysregulate your life. Number two, we want to make sure that we don't misdiagnose you and you don't have a diagnosis of depression when you're simply grieving. Okay? Sometimes grief will mimic those signs and symptoms of a depressed mood. And so we want to make sure that you're getting the right care. There's also psychologists. Psychologists have a PhD, which means they have gone even further in studying, typically requiring them to do 8 years of study. They are experts in the field of identifying psychological factors that contribute to mental health challenges. Many times we see psychologists work in the schools, or they have independent practices as well. Psychologists are usually a really good resource for those that have experienced long runs of trauma, abuse. They may have co-occurring disorders such as substance abuse and mental health and illness. And so psychologists have studied only that psychological aspects of the mental health. And so that's a really good resource to have what we call a full psychological evaluation. They're going to go a lot deeper into the evaluations than an LPC or a licensed clinical social worker is, because that is all they do. They focus on the psychological aspects of mental health challenges. A social worker is going to focus on holistically what is contributing to this mental health. Work, school, social aspects, encompassing holistic approach. Which systems are contributing? And then we have psychiatrists. Psychiatrist is the only mental health professional that is licensed to prescribe mental health medications, psychotropic medications, long-term. Psychiatrists have studied the benefits, the risk, and the impacts of medication for many years. They too have obtained a doctorate level degree focused on medications, right? They are the experts in the field of prescribing medications. It's very important that when you start to take medication beyond 3 months, that you seek out a licensed psychiatrist. So many times people will go to their primary care physician and they're experiencing a bout of depressed mood, signs and symptoms of a depressed mood, because they've had a traumatic loss. Maybe a son has been killed with no signs or no awareness, or it was unexpected, is what I'm trying to say. Or maybe we lose a partner or a spouse and it's totally unexpected. They were not sick. And so we can suffer grief that becomes complicated, that leads to depressed mood. Or a woman who has a child, right? And she may have what's called postpartum depression. And so that's just a temporary depression. So the gynecologist may give a low dose of a medication to help manage the depression. The primary care physician may give a low dose of a medication to help manage low-level depression or basic anxiety. Someone may be suffering with anxiety because, they're at school and they have test-taking anxiety. And so the primary care physician may give you a small dose of a medication. And I always suggest to the clients that I work with, once you go beyond about 90 days, 3 months of having to take that medication, it's really a good idea to have a full psychiatric evaluation, because they are going to really do a deeper level of study as to which medications work best for you. It's not a science, right? it's very exploratory because we all have very different chemical DNA and makeup. And so you want to be with someone who is an expert in that field so that as you begin to take these medications, they're studying very closely how the medication is impacting you. Are you getting better in some areas, but worse in others? Sometimes the psychiatric medications can help you to feel better mentally, but they can start to cause some physical ailments. And so we want to really be with someone who is professional and they can monitor you every 30 days, monitoring your blood levels to make sure that they find the best fit for you. So why is it important? Some people will say, I don't want to go to a psychiatrist because that just means I got real problems. It's kind of like going to your primary care physician for a heart surgery, right? So I may go to my primary care physician because I'm having some discomfort in my chest and I'm having difficulty breathing, like for asthma. They're great. And they may even do some testing and find out that I have high cholesterol and I'm starting to have blockage. But they're not going to be the ones that do the open heart surgery, right? It's going to be a heart specialist. It's the exact same way when we think about psychiatrists, right? The primary care physician can prescribe you medications to help manage low-level symptoms. But if this is going to be a long-term illness where there's a real chemical imbalance, you want to have the expert there to help you. There are times when you are struggling with mental health, signs and symptoms of anxiety, depression, grief, where simply being in a support group is enough. Talking to your leaders in your church, connecting with those at women's groups, finding a support system, that will be enough. Life coaches, that may be enough if you are only dealing with basic symptoms that are temporary. But if you're starting to deal with symptoms that are exacerbating your energy, you're extremely tired, can't get out of bed, and it's disrupting your total daily life and function, that is when you may want to come to the next step. A licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, we are considered the next level of expertise in mental health, but we're also the least level of intrusive intervention, right? So you want to start with a clinical social worker or licensed professional counselor, because what we'll do is we'll take information, we'll do an assessment, and then we will determine whether or not just therapeutic intervention will be enough. Or sometimes we may say we might need to refer you for a full psychological evaluation, or we may need to refer you for a psychiatric evaluation because it may take some medication management to help you get to a place of stability where the counseling is even effective. A lot of times people struggle with understanding how to get into mental health counseling. Mental health counseling is a profession, and so services are not free, unfortunately. Your insurance does cover health and behavioral services. So if you need mental health services, be sure to contact your insurance carrier and ask them if they cover mental health services. Most of them do. You also have access to what's called EAP, or employee assistance programs, through most of your insurance benefits. That gives you about 6 to 8 free sessions. So you would call your EAP, it's usually on the back of your insurance card, and let them know that I'm struggling with a low mood, depressed mood, or anxiety, or family conflict. And they will assign you 4 sessions, 6 sessions, or 8 sessions, depending on your carrier, for you to see a mental health professional like myself or a licensed professional counselor for free. And that will serve as an introduction to mental health. Now, don't worry, because you do have to sign consent forms for us to be able to share anything with anyone. Anything you talk about with a professional mental health professional service provider must be held in the highest form of confidence. I am mandated by law, by my licensing division, to not share anything with anyone unless you provide written consent. That includes your spouse. You have to provide written consent. Your job is not going to know what you're talking about with me or another mental health provider. You are protected by law. Confidentiality through HIPAA, right? It's a violation for us to share any information. So once you get through the EAP services, or maybe you don't have EAP, maybe you're coming right in and you need to use your insurance, typically there are going to be some consent forms that you have to sign. We have to have you sign these consent forms, giving us the authorization to work with you, because sometimes when you're working through mental health challenges, it may bring up some old wounds that you thought were gone, right? So we'll do that. And then typically you'll have an administrative assistant that will run through your insurance, verify your insurance, and share with you your copay. Your copay is the amount that you will be responsible for paying each time you see the mental health professional for a counseling session. That means that your insurance will pay a portion of it and you will pay the other portion, which is typically between $20 to $50, depending on the mental health provider's fee. There are a few agencies where you can get free mental health services. That would be the Harris Center in Houston, Texas. Also, Legacy is a place that provides some mental health services free for adults. There's not very many free mental health services. There are some other churches that provide some groups or free mental health services. But Legacy and the Harris Center in Harris County typically will provide free mental health services. If you're struggling with a mental health crisis, you can call the number 988 if someone is struggling with a mental health crisis. They will offer you resources. You can just speak with them. Someone is there to answer those lines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including holidays. That number is 988. If you do not have a mental health therapist, you're unsure of whether or not you need one, you're feeling overwhelmed and you need someone to talk to, call that number 988. There are trained mental health professionals that will speak to you, that will talk to you, that will help you get connected to the resources that you need in your community. So if you're living in the Humble area, they will find resources for you in the Humble area. They will look for free resources for you. They will send out a mobile crisis team to help you if you're in imminent danger to yourself or others. Now, if you feel like you're at risk of harming yourself or others, please call 911. They will get to you the quickest. Call 911 first and let them know, I'm experiencing some mental challenges. I need help. Many hospitals have mental health units and they can get you stabilized and transferred or assessed for stability before transferring you either to another mental health facility or back home. They cannot keep you without your consent unless you are in active danger to harm someone else or yourself. Again, please call 911 if you or someone that you love is in immediate risk and imminent danger, a risk to harming themselves or others. Call 988 if you need support. You're in crisis or you need some quick support that you're not able to get from a psychiatrist, a mental health therapist like myself, or a psychologist. We are not typically crisis workers. 988 will help you to get the resources you need right away. I hope that something that I've shared with you today will help you to understand a little bit more about the resources and how mental health services work, so that you'll have a little bit more knowledge, because we know that knowledge is power. Take care of yourselves because you sure are worth it. In the next segment, I'll share a little bit about some practical application, share a few stories to help you understand how you might apply this knowledge in your everyday life. Talk to you later. Bye.